My name is Mary Jo Elsey, and this is my digital portfolio for my final project for technology. I'm going to start out talking about the technology lesson that I used. So in one of my kindergarten units, we did a research project on an animal. Each student picked a few nonfiction animal books, and then they had to find some information to create their own book. So some of the questions they had to answer was, where does it live? What does it eat? Do people keep it as a pet? Does anything hunt it? Is it endangered? And just a cool fact about it. So once they answered that, they made it their own nonfiction book that they wrote and illustrated. So for some of my ELLs and my lower students, I gave a sentence frame. So the blank lives in blank. And they were able to find all this information from the different texts that they were given. They then used a word processor, Microsoft Word, to type using sentence frames and insert a picture with their 8th grade buddies. So I was lucky enough to structure this lesson in a time that we had the 8th grade students. I think if I were to do this again without 8th grade buddies, I would probably do that in small groups, so I could work with just a few of the kids at a time, because they have never used Microsoft Word before. This was the first time that they had used this, and I had never taught using Microsoft Word in kindergarten, but I think they enjoyed it, and they got that experience to have like what the big kids do and like what they see their older siblings do and what they see the older students in the school do, because we are pre-K 3 to 8 in my building. So then after they did that, I compiled them all into a book to keep in our classroom library, and all of the books that they've made throughout the year are their favorite books. So those ones are always, if there's a minute of silent reading, that one's always one of the first ones off the shelf. Here's a student example. My animal is a dog. Dogs live all over the world. They eat meat and some plants. Many people have dogs as pets. Dogs are not hunted or endangered. And one cool fact is I have a dog named Minnie. So although that wasn't like a non-fiction evidence-based fact, it was a cool fact for that student. And then they used Google Images to find and insert an image. So the 8th graders really helped with the image search as well. So in my reflection, some challenges. This was my first time using Microsoft Word, so maybe I would just go through and do some more simple things prior to using it, like maybe have them just write their name and things like that, instead of just jumping right into like writing sentences. They've used assorted typing tools to get to know the keyboard. And I actually adapted it. So certain students, I did have them write their whole paragraph, like the example I showed you. And other students, I actually just had them write the cool fact, just because I know that their typing skills are lower and that they would be overwhelmed. So that's how I adapted it to my students. Some improvements, I would give more explicit instructions to the 8th graders. Maybe even like meet beforehand with them to just go over. It was just a little bit hectic getting them to understand the topic while all the kindergartners were there and really excited to get started. So just from a management perspective, I think it would have been helpful to either send them explicitly stated instructions, like 4 steps of bullet points that they need to do, and really emphasize that they're supporting, they're not doing the work. I did have a couple 8th graders that wanted to just quickly help them. And I said, no, this is the kindergartners project. You're here to help, not to do it. So in relation to WIDA, it targets WIDA Standard 3 for science and number 2 for language arts. And this project relates to my methods and materials class that I took. We learned about different ways to create class books, and that really increases their engagement in the content area. It hits a number of standards. We hit NGSS, Common Core, WIDA, and ISTE. It's hitting that writing and research and plant and animal needs standard there. So moving along, my technology tool project, we created persuasive writing posters. So throughout this school year, my class was responsible for collecting crayons and markers to be recycled, and my students were really invested in this project. They actually worked on sorting the crayons. We donate them to Scarce in Glen Ellen, and Scarce has an outline of how you can sort the crayons that will save them time and energy. So my class took that project on as it's like the kindergarten standard. There's a sorting standard in math. So we really connected that, and my students felt the impact of like real life math. And also with the markers, we shipped them off to Crayola Color Cycle, and my students had to count them out, and they were shocked at how you could use math. And we tallied every 10 markers they put in a box. They had to do a tally, and they were just in shock that you can use math to help solve real life problems, like finding the weight of a box to tell the mailman how much it weighs. So since they were so invested in this, in our persuasive writing unit, one of the prompts was, let's solve a school-wide problem. So in Earth Day in April, we really had a big push for the crayons and marker recycling throughout the school. And we started informing the other classes. And my students were really invested in this by the time we hit this lesson in the poster part. So we talked about other problems in the school, but they decided that this was the biggest problem that they as kindergartners could address. So what they did, they created persuasive writing posters by hand. So they used markers, they used illustrations and pictures. I was really sad that I didn't have any of them left over, because they all went home with the kids. And while I was doing this project, I didn't have that, but I did have the e-copy of one of the posters that they made on Canva. So let me show you one of the student examples. So they actually took ideas from each of them, and I helped this group find the template. It already had like the little recycling bags on the bottom, and they said, we want to put a picture of crayons and markers on top of the bags. So I helped them find pictures of that. And then the kids actually typed in over the prompts that were in there. It was great to have them work in small groups, because as like one of them was typing, like they each took turns typing actually the 4 different sections. I think we had 3 or 4 kids in this group, and they took turns writing in there, and they were just really invested in creating the posters. And then we were able to post some of the posters around the school to encourage the other students in the school to donate their broken crayons, recyclable markers that are dried out, and avoid putting them in the garbage. My reflection, the students' experience was great. They loved making their posters both by hand and working together to make one online. I worked with a group at a time with groups of 3 or 4, which worked really well. I think if we would have tried doing it any more than that at a time, they would have been a little bit overwhelmed without enough teacher assistants, as this was the first time working with it. And it's not the most student-friendly platform, but I did try to put one more tech-savvy kid so they could try to help each other out before I would step in. My students reacted really well to this. They loved making the poster. Some of them said, "Oh my gosh, it looks like a grown-up made this." And they did need a lot of guidance to use the websites to its fullest capabilities, but they enjoyed using it. I would do something like this again in the future. My students were able to find what they wanted and took great pride in the project. And we were able to reach out to the community of the school too as a whole by posting these posters in the hallway and making an impact on the school. My ELLs in my classroom are pretty close to their peers. They all scored like 5s or 6s in most of the content or on most of the areas. And they enjoyed the project, and by working together, they were able to adjust some grammatical errors and just address any language issues. Since we had been working on the overall project for this, they really understood it, and it wasn't an issue. I think that all ELLs would be supported in this, maybe providing sentence frames as some help during the persuasive writing unit, as this was more of a culminating activity. They didn't really need that this time around. They did peer edit and work together to adjust any of the language. And they decided as a group what words they wanted to use and things. This project addressed many standards. It hit NGSS, reducing the impact of humans on the land, water, and living things in the local environment. It hit the digital tools in writing and using English grammar and usage when writing and speaking. It targeted the WIDA standard for 2 for language arts, and it hit the ISTE standard. They used a visual to communicate complex ideas. For one of my professional development days, we actually went to a local school that was a couple towns over that is one-to-one, because my school is not, and we just observed what our goal was actually to observe their technology usage and what we could implement, because we are purchasing additional technology for the next school year. So I observed a kindergarten class, and the teacher was using Dreambox. Dreambox is a math tool, and it's adaptive. So when the students meet a certain skill, they earn coins, and they can buy things in the little store on Dreambox. And yes, and after they achieve this skill, they'll move on to a different skill. So the teacher I observed was conducting math centers, and she used Dreambox as an independent learning center. So it adapts to the student's skill set, and the teacher can assign tasks for them to focus on as well. During my observation, the students were working on place value with her, while her guided practice group was focusing on number bonds. So they were working on separate things. That's maybe something I would address. I would try to be reinforcing the same content that we were learning at the time, but maybe they were reviewing. I didn't actually have a chance to ask the teacher about that. So I'm not sure if they were just trying to review. I think there are many benefits for ELLs. There are language options, and it lowers the effective filter by giving clues and hints when the student makes an error. My last section is about a new technology resource, Scratch Junior. So the purpose of Scratch Junior, it combines coding with literacy and was designed for children from ages 5 to 7. Students can make games, books, or videos through the application. I found out about this through posting in a Facebook group of other kindergarten teachers. Really wanted to make sure that if I was going to look into using a new tool, that it's something that my students could actually benefit from. So some pros of Scratch Junior is adaptable, so all children are able to use it, and it can be differentiated based on skills. So maybe a lower functioning student would create something a little more simple, whereas like a higher student could make a whole video game that they could play. So it was designed specifically with young children in mind, which means that they're capable of using it to its fullest. Some cons from reading several reviews, students need a lot of guided practice, which it could be a con, but I think guided practice is really important in the early childhood years. So you're teaching students how to do things responsibly. And then you could use this with ELLs. It would be a really good tool because it allows practice in all 4 domains of language. So you could do reading excerpts, you could do writing, you could do speaking and listening through the creation of books or games. It allows you to record in them. They can type text. They can insert images to build vocabulary. So it's really useful for ELLs. I just have an example here. So it shows like the different coding features that they can put together. So for instance, the arrows here are showing what movements they'll be making. So it's really just a cool way to introduce that coding feature along with building literacy. So it's very interdisciplinary. And I think my students would really enjoy it. From the teachers that I read about, really, their students got a lot out of it. Thank you for listening. That is the end of my presentation.